Hi everyone. I think we're just on the clock now, and since we have quite a bit of ground to cover today, so I guess we'll. So as I mentioned earlier, we'll cover two basic, important points in the webinar today. One is the gold standard validation and verification body requirements, and the other one, is some important rule updates. So these, rule updates and clarifications have already been, released by gold standard quite some time back. But since these are quite relevant for all the validation verification bodies, so we are doing a quick refresher on these rule updates and clarification. So starting with the validation and verification body requirements. So this document was released by Gold Standard earlier this year, I think in January this year. And this version of validation and verification body requirements document is a pretty significant change if you compare it with the earlier version of this document. Now, this document is quite detailed in terms of the eligibility criteria, what are the various requirements which validation verification bodies have to demonstrate in order to get an approval from gold standard, and also details out the gold standard approval process. But since this document is quite heavy, in terms of the content, so we'll only be, covering one part of this document in the webinar today. The second part, we'll cover in the next webinar. So if we dissect, this document, it has, two main components. The first component, deals with the eligibility and approval requirements for the VVBs, and the second component is on the approval process. So for the sake of time, we'll only be focusing on the eligibility and approval requirements in the webinar today, and the approval process will be dealt with in the next webinar. You might also be aware of the fact that SustainCert is responsible for keeping a track of all the validation and verification bodies' performance. So based on the agreement which Gold Standard Foundation and SustainCert has, SustainCert is responsible to monitor the performance of all the validation and verification bodies. And since this process has been running now from quite some time, so we think that an update on this process will actually go very well with the approval process. So that's why we'll discuss the approval process, the gold standard approval process, along with an update on this SustainCert validation and verification body performance system in the next webinar. So these requirements apply to all projects, activities, POAs, standalone projects which are being validated or verified by VVBs, regardless of whatever version that project is using the standard. So let's say if there is a gold standard version 2.2 under validation, so the VVB which is doing a version 2.2 project validation is also required to follow the requirements laid down in this document. Before we move on to to the eligibility requirements and approval requirements, I just wanted to quickly highlight the various functions of Gold Standard Foundation and SustainCert. So Gold Standard Foundation is responsible for the overall approval or reapproval of validation verification bodies. So if you as a VVB is required to reapply for gold standard approval, then Gold Standard Foundation is the main body which will be taking care of the process. So therefore, anything related to accreditation status, anything related to submission of applications for gold standard approval, etc., are all dealt by Gold Standard Foundation. And since this document is owned in a way by Gold Standard Foundation, so if there are any general inquiries that you have about approval processes, or if you need any further information on the requirements for that, you can reach out to Gold Standard. Sustain Cert, on the other hand, is responsible for managing the VVB examinations, all the trainings, the quarterly trainings that we do for VVBs, and also the management of the eligible auditor list on the Gold Standard website is all taken care of by Sustain Cert. Also, if there are any project specific issues that you as a VVB or an auditor would like to discuss, let's say related to any ongoing validation or verification, then you can reach out to Sustain Cert for those type of issues. All right. So as I said, this document basically has two components, and in today's webinar, we'll only be focusing on the eligibility and approval requirements. So there are different areas and different set of requirements which Gold Standard expects all the validation verification bodies to follow. Now, since most of the validation verification bodies that are working on Gold Standard projects already have a base accreditation available, like some are accredited by CDM, some are and some have 14,065 accreditation under the ANSI program. So these requirements are something which you might already be following as part of your as part of your base accreditation requirements. But I think still it is worthwhile to go over what Gold Standard expects, because there might be some additional requirements which you have to follow or meet on top of the base accreditation that you already might be having. So for instance, in terms of legal status, Gold Standard requires all the VVBs to have a registered entity status in whatever host country they are registered. Also, Gold Standard requires the VVB to maintain a record of all its judicial processes which were there in the past or which are ongoing. So even though this information is not required to be submitted as part of the application process which you might be submitting to Gold Standard, but still a record of all these information should be maintained by the VVB, because Gold Standard has the right to seek for this kind of information anytime in the approval process. Also, as I said earlier, Gold Standard approval process works, on a base accreditation system. So there are 3 accreditation programs which are approved or eligible to become a Gold Standard VVB. One is, ISO 14065 GHG accreditation, which is offered by, ANSI GS accreditation program. Second one is UNFCCC CDM accreditation, or for VVBs working, in the loop sector. For that FSC, certification body status provided by ASI is required as the base accreditation. If there are, any inconsistencies which are there in between the base accreditation and the Gold Standard VVB requirements, then VVBs, are expected to notify Gold Standard of any such, inconsistencies. Also, since Gold Standard does not have its own accreditation program, it only works on a base accreditation. So it is important for all the VVBs to always maintain, a recognized accreditation. So any one of these 3 should always be maintained by the VVBs, in order to continue work as a gold standard VVB. In case the accreditation gets over or is lapsed, uh, then those type of information should be immediately intimidated to gold standard. In cases wherein a non-conformance by any accreditation program happens, then that VVB is required to immediately inform gold standard, um, and that notification should include the reasons why that non-conformance happened, including a discussion on the corrective actions that the VVB plans on taking. And also, it should be noted that if a VVB loses, let's say, its accreditation during the gold standard approval period, that also should be immediately notified to the gold standard. The notification should also include details of all the projects for which the VVB has already signed the contract, and for which the VVB is in the middle of validation or verification. Uh, Also, just wanted to highlight that any approval which gold standard provides to a validation verification body has a 36-month duration, meaning that the approval status is valid only for 3 years. So every 3 years the VVB is required to renew its approval status with gold standard. So during this 3-year period, if any changes happen in the VVB space accreditation, then that should be immediately notified to gold standard. Human resources also is a key aspect of the eligibility and approval requirements, because gold standard for the global gold requirements are not same as, let's say, the CDM requirements. So there are additional requirements on top of carbon validation and verification, which a VVB has to check for all gold standard projects. Therefore, it is important that the auditors or the audit team which is working on gold standard projects is able to demonstrate that their audit team is capable and has the required amount, the required competency to validate or verify gold standard projects. So this might be something which you have to demonstrate additionally on top of the base accreditation requirement. So you have to demonstrate competence related to gold standard rules and requirements that the audit team carries. So there has to be a proper process to document, implement, and maintain a procedure to make sure that the audit team is competent for gold standard validations and verifications. And not only that, the VVB also has to make sure that they have access to sufficient resources, sufficient availability of team members for each one of the certification pathways for which the VVB has applied for gold standard approval. So let's say if a VVB has applied for both energy and waste and land use and forestry approval, then the availability of sufficient personnel or resources has to be demonstrated for both these two project types. Also, gold standard expects VVBs to evaluate the status of their audit teams or their internal staff members at least annually, to make sure that the necessary competence for all the technical areas is maintained throughout the gold standard approval period. And also the VVB is able to sufficiently cater to the different locations of the various gold standard projects or POAs that they are working on, and also that the team is capable to to handle future validations and verifications. And this applies to all types of resources that a validation or verification body uses. So if there is internal team, then these requirements apply to the internal team. If the VVB is making use of, let's say, individual experts or is subcontracting, then these requirements apply to all those resources. And as I mentioned earlier, this has to be demonstrated for each certification pathway for which the VVB, has applied for the gold standard approval. And there should be at least one person qualified in the technical area who will, be eventually participating in the validation or verification activities. And also, in the technical review team, there has to be at least one person qualified in that specific technical area, which will be part of the audit team. And these requirements can be met by the VVB either by using internal sources, either by hiring external individuals, or by outsourcing or subcontracting a part of their validation verification services. So these are three options through which a VVB can comply to these requirements. In case of external individuals, the external individuals can basically act as validators, verifiers, technical experts, team leaders, technical reviewers. So, all these, roles can be, met by the use of external individuals. If, an external individual is engaged in any validation verification, it is VVB's responsibility to make sure that there is a contract with that external individual, and that contract is basically a three-party contract and happens between the external individual, the VVB, and also the company which is let's say is employing that external individual. So any work which is carried out by an external individual ultimately becomes the responsibility of the VVB, uh, meaning that the performance of that specific external individual will be the responsibility of the VVB. So it is up to the VVB to make sure that external individual complies with all the gold standard applicable policies and procedures, including confidentiality, impartiality, independence, etc. Also, the agreement should be clearly stating any conflict of interest that external individual might have uh, with that specific gold standard project. Um, and also it is VVB's responsibility to make sure that the external individual is familiar with the VVB's procedure for validation and verification functions, and has been given relevant trainings, relevant information, or access to all the documents that external individual might be required in order to complete his validation or verification functions. Uh, so since the external individual again becomes part of the overall audit team, so therefore all the requirements which are related to the competency and experience or trainings apply to all the external individuals as well. So if gold standard says that all the auditors have to attend at least, let's say, 2 trainings in a year to remain eligible, then that requirement applies to this external individual as well. In cases wherein the external individuals are contracted for activities, let's say, other than greenhouse gas projects, or let's say there is a new product which has to be certified, or there are SDG impact statements which have to be certified. So in those cases, the validation verification body has to share the CVs of those external individuals with gold standard for transparency. All right. So those were so that was the option of external individuals. The other option which a VVB can make use of is outsourcing and subcontracting. Again, I'm sure you must be following most of these requirements as part of your base accreditation requirements. But since gold standard requirements are somewhat additional and should be followed on top of what you're already following for your base accreditation. So a similar type of requirement uh, exist for outsourcing or subcontracting uh, issues also. So similar to the use of external individuals, in the case of outsourcing subcontracting also, the VVB has to establish a proper process to document, implement, and maintain a procedure for subcontracting. And having a contract with the outsourced entity is a must, and it should be clearly stated that the outsourced or the contracted activity entity is performing the validation or verification activities in line with the gold standard rules and requirements. And also all the activities which are outsourced to the subcontracted entities becomes VVB's responsibility. Conflict of interest again is an important point which should be clearly clarified with the subcontracted or outsourced entities. So the subcontractor basically has to verify in the form of a declaration that he or she does not have any sort of COI with that gold standard project. And again, in cases wherein there are subcontracting happening for activities other than, GHG, like, new products or SDG impact statements, then the details on subcontracting has to be shared with gold standard. So for example, a VVB has been appointed to verify, let's say, A dailies from a gold standard project. Now, in those cases, in such a case, the VVB, internal team might not be fully competent or fully equipped to validate or verify the project, so that VVB can outsource that function to another entity. And if that happens, then the VVB has to share all the details of the outsourcing and the entity with gold standard. In case there is subcontracted entity already involved, then that subcontracted entity cannot further outsource this function to somebody else. So it's only till one level that the subcontracting or outsourcing is allowed. The third way to ensure that the audit team is competent enough is to make use of individual experts. Now these individual experts could be used by VVBs for certain certification pathways, and in such cases the individual has to submit an application to gold standard for approval before they enter into any contract to conduct validation or verification. Now I think this is more relevant for land use and forestry projects, wherein individual auditors are also allowed to validate or verify land use and forestry projects, small scale or micro scale land use and forestry projects. So in such cases one individual expert can also play the role of validation validator or verifier. And in those cases, the approval has to be given by gold standard, for which a CV and a letter of motivation declaring that there is no conflict of interest has to be provided to gold standard. In terms of the structure and competence of audit teams, so there has to be at minimum a team leader and a validator or verifier in the audit team. So that's the the minimum criteria. If the VVB feels that the audit team needs more resources, more personnel, or additional expertise that can be added to the audit team, but at minimum the audit team should have a team leader and a validator or verifier. And the competency of the team is looked at it is looked from a collective perspective. So the entire audit team collectively should have the necessary competence, including knowledge and experience of all the gold standard rules and requirements, based on which they are validating or verifying any project. If the audit team let's say is working on or is involved in validation verification of a project which for which a different language is required, then the audit team collectively should have the required knowledge of the language in which the validation or verification is taking place. So it is possible that the team leader might not be well versed with the language, but if let's say the validator or verifier is well aware of the local language, that also is sufficient. And then the audit team collectively should have the relevant knowledge of the gold standard project activity. So either it is the methodology that is being applied to the project, or either it is let's say host country information, or knowledge about the specific economic or geographic conditions. So that should be collectively held by the audit team. So in terms of a validation team, I would highly recommend you to please check Annex B of the VVB requirements document. So Annex B basically details out or guides the basic areas in which the validation team collectively should have the knowledge and the skills. For instance, additionality assessment or baseline assessment or SDG assessment, checking the applicability of the methodology, etc. Should be something that the validation team should have knowledge of. And similarly, for verification, knowledge of the sustainable development, impact assessment, or monitoring, GHG accounting or monitoring is something that the verification team should collectively possess of. So this is a screenshot that I have taken directly from Annex B of the validation and verification body requirements document. So it details out the knowledge area. So there are 4 key knowledge areas which are identified in this Annex B, and it is expected that the audit team, the validation or verification team, collectively possesses knowledge of these 4 key knowledge areas. So the knowledge areas are additionality assessment and baseline assessment, GHG accounting and monitoring, sustainable development assessment, and safeguarding principles. So for validation, these 4 key knowledge areas are something which the audit team should be able to manage. So like, let's say knowledge related to IRR or investment analysis, knowledge related to an additionality assessment, and the establishment of the gold standard or CDM methodologies, etc. Are something which the validation team should be aware of. And for specific gold standard requirements, sustainable development goals and targets, sustainable development impact indicators, the main environmental, economic, or social risks that a project faces, etc., should be part of the no, the overall knowledge of the audit team. Okay. So just having enough human resources is not sufficient. Uh, these auditors or resources also have to be uh, managed and should be checked for competency. So that's why gold standard introduced this concept of VVB examination some time back. So it is required that all gold standard auditors, individual experts, subcontractors, uh, or individual auditors are required to participate in the VVB exam, which is managed by Sustain Cert. And this examination is also a key criteria in the overall approval of the gold standard application. So if, let's say, a new VVB is applying for a gold standard approval, then the validators or verifiers or team leaders from that VVB has to successfully clear the examination. And also, if a VVB is applying for reapproval of its gold standard validity, then in those cases also this online examination should be taken up by the auditors. In addition to the examination, there are a few requirements on trainings which the auditors have to meet. So all auditors, experts, from internal team or from subcontracted entities, are required to take at least 2 trainings or attend, at least 2 trainings in a given year. And in order to maintain, the approval status provided by gold standard, the VVB has to ensure that at least, one team leader and one validator verifier has completed 2 trainings uh, each year during the 3-year gold standard approval validity. So in summary, in order to maintain eligibility, the team leader and validator verifier first has to attend 2 training programs every year, and they also have to clear the VVB exam on an annual basis. So this would ensure that even though the VVB approval is for 3 years, but these auditors, that is the team leader, validator, verifier, will remain eligible on an annual basis. So the VVB online exam has now been updated recently by Sustain Cert. Earlier the exam which we were running was pretty outdated and was, I think, introduced at the time of launch of gold standard for the global goals. But now, since the standard itself has gone through a couple of revisions, and there are a lot of changes which has happened in the rules and requirements, so the online exam has been updated and is now available on the Sustain Cert website. So let me try and show you how you can access the online exam. I hope you can see the screen. So this is the Sustain Cert website, sustain-cert.com. So if you go to the top bar, there is a tab called Resources. And under Resources, you should be able to see this section on VVB online exam. So once you click on the VVB online exam, it takes you to this page wherein you can actually go ahead and take the test. So if you click on it, this page will appear from where you can go ahead and take the exam. So there will be certain details that you have to fill in for the exam. And then you have to select for which scope you are applying as an auditor, and then proceed further. So I hope you were able to see that. Okay. All right. So back to the presentation. Uh, so I think many of the VVBs, now are in the process of taking reapproval of their gold standard approval status. So if you are in the process of submitting, application for reapproval, or if you are, in the process of, adding new auditors, then please make sure that you have to, take this online exam, and the results of this online exam will be part of the overall, gold standard application review process. Okay, so those were, on a very high level, the important um, eligibility and approval related requirements, which all VVBs now have to comply with in order to remain or become a gold standard approved VVB. I think we can now move on to the next segment of the webinar, which is on rule updates and clarifications. So there are three, three rule updates which we will cover today. The first one, is related to VPA CPA inclusion requirements. So this, requirement was released quite some time back in August last year. But since this is a very important requirement for the VVBs, we thought of doing a refresher on this requirement for this webinar. So the VPA CPA inclusion requirements were released to provide more flexibility for the gold standard POAs. Flexibilities in terms of compliance check requirements which are required to be undertaken by the VVB. So these requirements apply to all scale POAs, so small scale, large scale, and also regardless of the version of the POA under which that version of the standard under which the POA was registered. So let's see what are these flexibilities. Now if if a POA fulfills these criteria, then basically the CME can make use of a self inclusion option. So self inclusion means the CME can directly include VPA CPAs in the registered POA without the need of a VVB compliance check. But of course, this is not as straightforward as it sounds, because there are certain conditions which the POA or the VPA CPA has to meet. So there are basically two main conditions. One is that at least one similar VPA CPA of that registered POA should have completed a performance certification successfully. So if a similar activity has already issued credits or labeled credits in the past, then similar future activities can be directly included in the POA. So when I say directly included, it means that a VVB compliance check is not required, but there will still be a sustained cert review of that activity. The other condition is that that VPS CPA that has completed performance certification in the past should involve same technology or same methodology, or if it is a multi technology POA, then same set of technologies and same set of methodologies. So those activities have to be similar to each other. Let's say we have a case wherein a POA has two technologies: improved cook stoves and safe water supply, but only the cook stove activities have undergone successful performance certification. So if a if a new first time, safe water supply activity comes in, then that activity cannot use the self-inclusion rule, because uh, the cook stove and safe water supply are two different technologies. But a VVB compliance check might still be required in certain cases. So let's see now what those situations are. So cases wherein the VPA CPS are not deemed automatically additional, uh, and wherein the additionality demonstration happens at activity level, then in those cases, the CME cannot make use of this self-inclusion flexibility. And therefore, in those cases, a VVB compliance check, is required. And also, if there are, any activities for which significant concerns, were identified at the time of preliminary review, for those activities also, a VVB compliance check will be required. So let's say, a very high risk hydro POA, uh, wherein, the additionality is demonstrated at activity level, and also there are, concerns which were identified related to the impact of the project during the preliminary review stage, then, those activities cannot be self-included, and the CME has to involve a VVB for a compliance check. In cases wherein the CME self includes the activities, but at a later stage, if you as a VVB find that these VPA CPAs are not complying, with any of the requirements at the time of verification, then it will be treated as a case of erroneous inclusion. And in such a case, those VPA CPAs will be further assessed in line with the requirements which are laid down for erroneous inclusion of activities. And also till a positive conclusion of VVB compliance check for the next two activities is received, no new inclusion of VPA CPAs will be allowed in case of erroneous inclusion. Okay, moving to the next update, which is on COVID-19 interim measures. So Gold Standard recently released version 4 of COVID-19 interim measures. I think in May this year. There are not many significant changes, but I have highlighted a few that are relevant for VVBs. So the interim measures, first of all, have now been extended from 30th of June to 31st December this year, meaning that any deviations which were already approved for these COVID-19 interim measures. So end date of those deviations are automatically approved or allowed or extended to the end of the year. Also now, stakeholder consultations can be postponed until the COVID-19 situation eases. I think the earlier requirement was that, stakeholder consultation has to be completed before the completion of validation or before the project, submits for design certification. But now if a project developer feels that they are not, in any position to carry out stakeholder consultations due to the ongoing pandemic, they have the option to postpone those meetings until the situation becomes or situation improves. However, it should be noted that whenever this postponed physical meeting is being carried out, that meeting should be carried out in line with the gold standard stakeholder consultation and engagement requirements. So there might be a case wherein you are validating a project and there is no physical meeting that was carried out for the stakeholder consultations. So that is fine. However, we are still sort of recommending or encouraging project developers to carry out some level of consultation, uh, which can be validated by the VVB. So these could be in the form of electronic webinars or video conferences that project developers can arrange. Also, the COVID-19 interim measures have introduced an annex on different, validation verification techniques, which VVBs can make use of uh, in order to, complete the remote audit. So I would, encourage you to all please, check this list of techniques which you could use for your remote audits. All right. Then the next, update is on the use of same VVB for validation verification. Again, this is not a new update. This was released, I think, sometime last year, I guess August 2020. But since we have been receiving quite a few queries on the use of same VVB by validation verification by project developers and also by VVBs, we thought of including this in the webinar today. So the rule update, basically now allows the same VVB to carry out both the validation and verification of a given GS4GG project. Now, when I say validation, it also means inclusion or crediting period renewal, or design change review for a given gold standard project. This update applies to all projects, all POAs, and to all certification types and pathways, and to all scales of projects. And projects which are registered with the previous version of the standard can also apply this rule. And there is no prior approval required from gold standard. But there are certain requirements which a VVB has to take care of when they are validating and verifying the same project. It should be ensured that the integrity and impartiality of the audit is maintained, meaning that if, let's say, you as a VVB has done the validation of the project and wants to verify also the same project, then the entire verification audit team, including the auditors, validators, verifiers, team leaders, are different from the team which performed the validation of that project. And also, if you are using or if a project developer is using the same VVB for both validation verification, then the VVB has to transparently disclose in the verification report that you have also performed the validation of that project in the past. And when we say transparently disclose that you have done validation, then that disclosure should also include the details of the validation audit team. However, this does not apply to a case of combined design and performance certification. So if a project is making use of this option to go for a combined design certification and performance certification, then in those cases these requirements does not apply. The same audit team can be responsible for both validation and verification. And yes, as I mentioned earlier, this basically enters into effect from October 2020, meaning that if you have signed any contract after this date, then you have to make sure that the different audit team requirements which we just discussed are met in those cases. However, in case of POAs, this rule basically enters into force immediately. So if there were any validation verification contracts which were signed immediately after the the release of this rule, then the VVB has to make sure that different audit teams are being appointed for validation or inclusion and verification. Okay, so these were, all the rule updates that we wanted to discuss with you, and also wanted to reiterate that, any assistance that you might require on the approval of your application for a gold standard VVB or reapproval, or if you want to, intimate gold standard on any update regarding your accreditation status, all those queries, you can contact gold standard. For other functions like examinations, trainings, or if there is any project specific issue that you would like to discuss, for those you can contact SustainCert. Okay, so I think we have quite a decent amount of time for Q&A. All right, so you should be able to see a small hand icon on your dashboard. So if you have any question, you can press that hand icon, and I then should be able to unmute you. Okay, so the floor is now open for questions. Hi, Robert. You are unmuted now.
Thank you, Neha. Good evening to everyone, or good morning to everyone, or whatever location you are in. I actually have posed several questions in the Q&A, Neha. Can you have a look at it and then respond?
I will definitely do that, Robert. Sure.
Yeah.
In case there are no
easier.
more questions, then maybe we'll go through your questions from the Q&A box.
Yeah, because only a few questions, very simple question I posed in the Q&A box. Thank you.
Okay, yeah, sure. Thank you. Anybody else? Questions? If not, then I think I can take some questions from the Q&A box. Maybe we can start with Robert's questions. So Robert, your first question is, how do we check when did we last take the exam? Okay, so Robert, as I mentioned, the earlier exam was set up, quite some time back. I think at the time when gold standard for the global goals was launched. So that exam, was pretty outdated because the standard itself has gone through a couple of revisions, and then over a period of 2 to 3 years, a lot of rule updates and clarifications have been released. So to take that information into account, the exam has now been updated by SustainCert and is now live, the new exam. So we would highly encourage that if you haven't taken the exam in a long time, feel free to go ahead and take the test. Anyways, SustainCert will also be following up with the auditors that we have in our database, to remind you on taking the exam. And yes, the exam is required to be taken annually, because even though the VVB approval is granted for 3 years, but the auditor eligibility is only for a year. So as an auditor, to become or to remain eligible, you have to demonstrate your eligibility on an annual basis. So to maintain your eligibility on an annual basis, there are 2 things that you need to do. First is to attend any 2 gold standard webinars in a year. And the second is to take this exam every year. So SustainCert, will be following up with the auditors separately also, especially those who haven't taken the exam in a long time. And the gold standard for the global goals, VVB requirements document basically gives 2 chances to the auditor. So if you're not able to clear the exam in first instance, you can reappear for the test. So yes, you can repeat the exam if you want. So hope, Robert, I was able to answer your questions. Um, okay, moving on. Oh, okay. I can see a raised hand. Uh, let me see. Yeah. Hi, Augustine. You are now unmuted. I think you are on mute.
Hello.
Yeah, we can hear you now.
Okay. Hello to everybody. Neha, this is
Mm-hmm.
about the non-conformities notification to the gold standard when in my case, for example, UNF Triple C raises a non-conformity to us.
Mm-hmm.
This is well, two questions here.
Mm-hmm.
Is one is including, I guess, is including regular surveillance
Mm-hmm.
done by UNF Triple C,
Mm-hmm.
regular audits conducted by them in which non-conformity can be raised.
Mm-hmm.
And second question is about the way to communicate this. I think it is through the VVB mail address
Mm-hmm.
or
Mm-hmm.
otherwise.
Yeah, that's right. That's a very good question. So I think the basic rationale for this requirement is that gold standard wants to keep a close tab on the status of the accreditation of all the VVBs. Now, as gold standard does not have its own accreditation system, and it relies on, let's say, the UNFCCC accreditation program for CDM or JI. So I think that's why gold standard wants to keep themselves informed of what's happening with the base accreditation of that VVB. So that is why gold standard has introduced this requirement of notification whenever any non-conformance by an accreditation program is being received by the VVB. And that notification should also include reasons for the corrective actions and the type of corrective actions that you plan on taking for those non-conformances. And yes, you can use the VVB at goldstandard.org email address to communicate this information.
Okay. Just a question remaining
Hmm.
is when, for example, when we receive the non-conformity from the UNFCCC, like we have had the regular
Hmm.
surveillance a few
Hmm.
months ago, when we have received some non-conformities, but we are at the stage of implementation of the corrective actions.
Hmm.
I mean, it is better maybe to provide this information to the GS
Hmm.
when the conformities are cleared, or the deadline of 120 days is mandatory, even if maybe the non-conformities are not yet cleared, because there can be modification in the
Yeah.
proposal of corrective actions and implementation depending on UNFCCC's feedback,
Right,
for example.
right, right. So I think it would be better if you follow this 120 days deadline, because again, as I said, gold standard is probably not that interested in taking a decision on what to do with those non-conformities, because that decision lies with UNFCCC. So I think it's just for an overall surveillance and monitoring system that gold standard wants to be aware of what's happening with the VVB's base accreditation status. So it is absolutely fine, even if those non-conformities are not addressed or are not closed yet within that 120 days of deadline. It is absolutely fine. The requirement is just to intimate gold standard, and then if gold standard feels that there is a requirement to follow up further, to check with you again after 30 days or 1 month, that they will do from their end.
Mhm. Okay, understood. Perfect. So we will provide
Mhm.
because Mercedes in the last surveillance. And apart from that, the performance evaluations by UNFCCC, for example, on the ground or on a specific project or POA, also applies. I think it's for all the types of accreditation audits. Hello?
Yeah, so you mean, you know, the you mean
Not
the reapproval?
No, not the reapproval. Reaccreditation audit is an audit on the office and procedures, quality management system documents, etc. I mean, on the on-field inspection by the UNFCCC, when the UNFCCC auditors go to a project which we are validating or verifying. They can,
like a witness audit.
Yes, yeah, witness audit. Yes, that is also included in this. Because normally they refer to technical aspects, validation and or verification aspects more than accreditation requirements. But anyway, if you decide so, we can also include these non-conformities in the notification to the GS.
No, I think it's you know, related to the broader accreditation status and not to, you know, any project specific non-conformities that are found. Yeah.
Okay, cleared. Thank you very much, Neha.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay.
We have another question from Jose. You are unmuted. Hello.
Hello.
Yeah, hi, we can hear you.
Hi, good morning to all. I would like to know if validation and verification bodies will receive information about when training session must have carried out. We will receive the information from Sustain Third about times to do the training sessions, or we have to check periodically the website. How will be procedure this thing?
So Sustain Cert, you know, releases quarterly communications to all the auditors. And these communications, you know, by email includes information on all the upcoming trainings and also, you know, all the details related to registration for the trainings. Yeah.
Thank you. Okay.
Thank you. Okay, there is another question from Anil. Anil, you are unmuted.
Yes. Hi, Neha. Thank you.
Yeah.
Can you hear me?
Yes. Hi. We can hear you.
Okay. Actually, I typed my questions, but let me also ask you here. You know, there was one requirement about there should be at least team leader and validator verified in the team. So that team leader and the validator, I think, can be the same person if all requirements are met by that specific person, right?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, and my second question is, you know, in some projects there might be need of some technical experts to complete the required technical area competence, and the role is only limited to give some technical knowledge about the project. They are not actual auditors. So are they also required to take those online exam, or this is only for validated, verified, and team leaders?
So Anil, you know, the exam is mostly, you know, for auditors. So if you are, you know, making use of any experts, like you want to make use of a financial expert for you know, investment analysis of a project, then that, you know, expert is not required to take the gold standard VVB exam. However, you know, all the requirements that we just discussed related to, you know, contracting and you know, conflict of interest, So all those requirements will apply to these experts also. So
You mean
that's
in terms
something.
of different
Yes.
team members in case
Yes.
of validation, verification by semi-VVB?
That also, and let's say, so we were, discussing these requirements on, these contracts and, conflict of interest declaration,
I see.
etc.
Yeah.
So all these requirements, will apply to the individual experts.
But the technical, the exam issue is beyond what's required by technical expert. Right?
Yeah, that's right.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Neha.
Thank you. Sorry, I'm just juggling between different windows on Q&A and chat box. I think we have, already sort of run over, a little bit of time. So we'll probably close the webinar today. But thank you for, posting all these questions. We'll be getting back to you on all these questions to you individually. And we'll also be circulating a transcript of the Q&A with all the participants of the webinar. And the webinar recording should be available on the Gold Standard website, Gold Standard YouTube channel in the next couple of days. So thank you all for taking out the time today to join the webinar. Please feel free to contact me directly, or feel free to feel free to reach out to our help desk, which is help@sustaincert.com, for any assistance that you might require. Thank you everyone, and have a good rest of your day.